You'd rather fail quietly than ask for help out loud. Not because you're stubborn, not because you don't trust people, but because somewhere along the way, asking stopped being a neutral act and started feeling like handing someone evidence against you. Evidence about who you are. You've spent hours on something a single question could have solved. You've watched a problem get worse while the person who could fix it was right there. And the silence didn't feel like avoidance. It felt responsible, like you were doing the right thing. That's the part worth paying attention to. It shows up at work when you spend 3 hours circling a problem instead of sending a 2-line message to someone who would know immediately, because sending that message means admitting you don't. It shows up at home when something breaks and you'd rather sit through 4 conflicting videos than call someone who's already offered to help. It shows up in relationships when someone you trust asks if you're okay and fine comes out before you've even decided if it's true. And then there's this. You're weeks into something going wrong, something specific, something you can't quite ignore, something that waits for you in silence, right before you fall asleep. And the one person who could help, they have no idea. Not because you forgot to say something, because saying something still feels like the worst option, even now. Struggling alone doesn't just feel manageable, it feels safer, safer than being seen. And that feeling has a source most people never find. Most people assume this is pride, the ego protecting itself, refusing to look weak. That's not what's going on. Pride cares about how you appear to other people. This runs deeper than that. This is about what you believe asking confirms, not to them, but to you. Because when asking feels like losing, the request has already been converted into a verdict. The help isn't the threat. What accepting it would mean, that's the part that feels unbearable. And that shift happens so fast you don't even notice it happening. Think of it like an invisible report card that never stops being updated. Every time you handle something alone, check, right column. Every time you need help, something in you marks it down. Not against your ability, against your worth, quietly, automatically. This is contingent self-worth. The belief that your value isn't something you have, it's something you have to keep proving. And one of the ways you prove it is by not needing anyone. So when help enters the picture, it doesn't feel like support, it feels like failure. The mind doesn't hear, I need help with this. It hears, I'm someone who couldn't handle it. And once that shift happens, the task becomes a test. The test becomes a verdict. And the verdict feels permanent. That's why the avoidance doesn't feel like weakness. It feels like protection. Like you're holding something together that might fall apart if you don't. Here's what this looks like from the inside. A deadline moves. The work becomes too much. Across the room, someone who has offered help before is right there. You open a message, you type something, you read it back. It sounds fine, normal, reasonable. You delete it. Not because it was wrong, but because sending it felt like saying something about yourself you weren't ready to admit. So you close it. You tell yourself you'll figure it out. You always do. The deadline gets closer, the pressure builds, the problem gets worse. And somehow, silence still feels more controlled than asking, more dignified, more safe. That's not ego. That's a system doing exactly what it was built to do. Keep the verdict off the record. What it was never built to do is notice what that silence is costing you. Once you see the mechanism, once you realize that asking isn't being processed as a task, but as a test of who you are, something shifts. Not the fear stays, but the meaning of the fear changes. Because now you can see it. And once you can see it, you don't have to obey it the same way. Here's the part most people never reach. You didn't come to this belief logically. You absorbed it. From environments where needing things created tension, where being capable wasn't just appreciated, it was expected, where independence wasn't strength, it was safety. No one sat you down and explained it. You just learned, quietly, repeatedly. And that conclusion followed you everywhere after, into every room, every relationship, every moment you had to decide whether to ask or stay silent. Even when those situations had nothing to do with where the belief came from. Once you understand that, that the report card was never yours, that it belonged to an older version of your life with different rules, different consequences, asking starts to feel different. Not easy, but different. Not like confession, not like exposure, just information. One person telling another person what they don't yet know. That's all it ever was. The competence was never what was being tested. You just inherited a system that told you it was. The next time that pull towards silence shows up, that quiet certainty that struggling alone is the safer move, pause. Just long enough to notice what's underneath it. Not the discomfort of asking, the judgment you were about to pass on yourself. Because needing help was never proof of anything except distance. Distance between where you are and where you're trying to get. That's it. The report card felt real. The pressure felt real. But the grades? They were never yours to carry. And once you see that clearly enough, you start noticing every other place you've been trying to prove something no one ever asked you to prove.